Do you love hiking, getting out in nature, exploring new places, and want some inspiration? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Everyday Hiker podcast. My name is Beck and I'm your host. I live in the beautiful southeast Queensland region of Australia, so many of the hiking ideas will be featured in this area, but we've also got some great travel inspiration for you, plus special guests, practical tips and guides to hiking to share with you. And if you like what you hear, please follow me, share with your friends, rate my podcast, and send me your feedback. Okay, welcome everyone again, and this is part 2 of my trip report from hiking the Nakasendo Way in Japan in October 2025. And in the last episode, I talked about all the things that you need to think about, whether it's when to go, how to get there, what to take with you, things that you need to be aware of, booking accommodation, etc. In that first episode. So well worth listening to that first if you've just stumbled across this one, because there's going to be some assumed knowledge from the first episode as I run through a trip report. Now, I did say in the last episode that I chose to walk in the most popular part of the Nakasendo Way, which is through the Kiso Valley, and I chose to walk north to south. So that means that I started my trip officially in Matsumoto and ended in Nagoya. I actually spent 2 nights in Matsumoto before I started the walk, and I really liked this town. It was quiet, not like the large cities, but it had a really nice mix of things to do. The highlight without a doubt is the Matsumoto Castle. This is the oldest castle in Japan. It's one of the 5 national treasure castles that's around. It's a wooden castle and it's pretty much the centre of the town. And one thing I would highlight to you to do, if you've got time to stop and have a look at this before you get walking, is they have free English guides that are volunteer locals who love to practice their English on you. And if you sit down with them, they will take you through the history of the castle, and it really makes a difference when you go inside the castle because you'll understand what you're looking at. You can climb to the top of the castle, which is great because some of the other castles aren't open inside. And there isn't particularly much to see except a lot of weapon displays. But the magnificent timber details are really worth looking at. And also the novelty of the steepness of the stairs. And I'm not kidding you, some of them were so steep and you take your shoes off as normal. So if your socks are slippery, You'll perhaps be challenged to keep yourself on the stairs at times because people buff them up by so many people coming through. But it was really lovely to go and visit. Also in Matsumoto, they have a number of art galleries and museums. I would definitely head to the main one. There is a Japanese artist, world-renowned, called Yayoi Kusama. You might know her because she paints a lot with dots and pumpkins. And because it's her hometown, there is a permanent feature there of her work. It's really amazing. It's 3D. There are dots everywhere. And it's absolutely worth a visit, a quick detour there. It's not expensive to go in and have a look at some of her artwork. From Matsumoto, you can also visit its Kamakochi, which is just look up the photos on a beautiful valley area for forest and mountain trails centred around a river with the big mountain peaks in the background. There's also the other parts of the Nakasendo Way, which are sort of north of Matsumoto, the most popular being the Yusai Pass. It's accessible from a nearby town, which you can catch a local train to. You could do that on a day trip and come back to Matsumoto, which is why I spent 2 nights there. I stayed at the Collecton Hotel, and I'll put the notes of all my accommodation in the show notes. I really liked this hotel. It was modern. They did a great buffet breakfast. There was an onsen, very short walk to the castle, and it was really good value for money. And as I had said in the first episode, they also forwarded my luggage on for me down to Nagoya. So what I did on my second day in Matsumoto was when I was at the train station, I researched the best train in the morning to start heading south. So I knew exactly what time to go, and this is really important because these local trains don't run that frequently. So rocking up and hoping to jump on a train to one of the popular towns, even though they're popular, could mean that you could wait for an hour and a half. So you want to know your train times before you head off, and also the train time in the afternoon if you're catching another local train back or to another stop along the way. So, and because I'd done my research beforehand, I bought a ticket for the train on the ticket machine this time, and it's valid for all day. So that's the good news. You don't have to pick a particular time if you're travelling on. I started in Yabahara. Now, that doesn't seem to make sense because I was going to the southernmost point of the trip first and then walking backwards to Narai. And you could definitely do it in either direction. I very purposely started in Yabahara because I wanted to spend my time exploring in Narai before having to jump on a train. So starting in Yabahara, it was very quiet in the early morning. There was only a few other hikers around, didn't really see any locals, and definitely not any shops open. The trail starts just out of town, and I put my All Trails app on so that I had the map running just in case, because I was by myself and there weren't many other people around. It is really well signposted once you find the start of the trail, so you probably don't need it once you get going, but it's just good to have that surety of which direction to head in. And there were a couple of times where they're offshoots of the trail, and All Trails was good just to sense check and say, I'm going straight ahead or left, right, whichever one. You head up out of town into the forest to start the trail. There's some toilets just before you start. And the first thing you'll see is a bear bell. So ring that at the bottom of the walk up and over the Tory Pass to Narai. I found the trails really wide, really well kept. The first few kilometres are winding trails uphill. So you're straight into it. I didn't find them too taxing. There's plenty of places to stop, and especially as you get a little bit higher, you get these wonderful views down to Yabahara, and I really didn't find that this part of the trail was difficult, even though you're going up and over a mountain. Near the top, you'll find a shrine or a small temple with some statues, which is a nice little diversion. You go up a set of stairs, have a look around there. And not long after I started walking away from that, I started seeing the monkeys, and there was lots of them in the trees next to the trail. I saw a couple crossing over the trail ahead of me. A couple jumped in a tree next to the trail and scared the life out of me. So they're just macaw monkeys, didn't feel threatening in any way. But I saw far more monkeys than bears. So, monkeys here. You keep walking and you get to the top of the Tory Pass, and it's a bit of an anticlimax, really, because you don't have any views, but there is a nice rest stop there. It's undercover, so if it was cold or raining, it'd give you a chance to stop, have a break, maybe change up your kit if you needed to. And after you get to that stop point, if you're travelling in the direction I was, you're then going downhill all the way into Narai. And I talked last episode about how I took hiking poles that folded up and were in my backpack. This is probably one of the sections of the trail where I wanted my hiking poles. There's water crossing the trail, there's water running off the mountain down towards the town. So I didn't think it was slippery so much, a little bit muddy. Anyway, it was helpful to have hiking poles here. And the only really steep piece, if you're worried about your knees going downhill, there were some stone steps into Narai, which actually were really quite steep. You could bypass them by walking the road into town. As you head into Narai, you'll pass by a folk museum. It was closed when I went past, and a temple, and you'll start to see the residential buildings. Narai is a beautifully preserved town. There's about a kilometre-long strip that sort of goes in a bit of a dogleg, and beautiful historical homes lining the street and shops, but very historical. And what I liked about Narai is you can actually go in a couple of the homes. So I chose to go into the home of the comb maker that had been lived in by the comb maker, and that was really nice. You could go up and see how they lived, into the kitchen. They had a lovely garden. They also had a display of the lacquered combs. So lacquered goods is something that Narrai is famous for. So I found strolling up and down that main street of Narrai and into little alleys and tucked away areas, you could really while away a couple of good hours. There's plenty of great little shops to pop into, and I found the local shop makers were really grateful to have you come in and visit. You know, maybe the tourists in the really busy time of the year are going to Mugamay or Samago, and maybe they don't see as many here in Narrai. So this is a nice place for it to not be so crowded, to wander into the little shops. One of the shops I went into, the husband made the lacquer chopsticks and bowls and other items, and the wife was working in the shop, and he was out the back making chopsticks, and that was just a nice little diversion to watch him. Also, the shop next door, so down a bit more towards the station, a very enterprising lady had printed Nakasendo Way t-shirts, which were great. So if you wanted a souvenir of your walk, this would be a good place to go. At the end of the town, before you hit the train station, after I'd wandered up and down, I also went up to the cemetery, and there's some magnificent giant cedar trees up here for a little walk around. No one else was up there, so something worth looking at. Get your All Trails Running to pick it out. There aren't so many eating options in Narrai. I saw a few restaurants, once again behind the curtains, that I think you might have had to book beforehand to go into, and there's no like convenience stores to grab food, so you take your food where you can get it. There was a really great produce store at the southern end of the main street that had quite a few options, and also the manager there said to me that alcoholic apple cider is a specialty of the region, the cool crisp apples that are there. And it was fabulous, but I'm glad I'd done most of my walking for the day because it gave me a little buzz. They like their alcohol in Japan. One thing I would say about Narrai is don't get there too early. So I got there at 11 a.m, which I would not call early, but it was about noon before you could see like twice as many shops had opened up by noon than what were open when I first arrived at 11. So that is another reason that I went down to Yabuhara first, because I had heard that, and I thought, well, if I got down to Narrai at 9 a.m, I might have missed out on some of these wonderful things that you could stop and do. I had worked out what time to get the local train down to Kiso Fukushima, so I headed down to the station. You want cash for the train fare here at Narrai if you haven't prepaid for a ticket. It was really cheap to head down to Kiso. And when I arrived there, I still had an hour or two of daylight left, so I thought, well, I'm going to walk up to the old checkpoint to see what that looks like. And there's a checkpoint museum up there. These aren't must-dos, but it was nice to understand what the officials would do in terms of the travellers, I guess like passport control, we would say today. And one of the interesting things was they particularly checked the females to make sure they weren't running away from their husbands. The Checkpoint Museum has been really well preserved, and you could easily while away a little time looking through all the displays that they have here. Another thing to do in Kiso Fukushima is if you head down to the river, there's a public footbath, so you can take your hiking shoes off and soak them in the lovely hot waters there. Kiso Fukushima is actually quite big. It's probably the biggest town on Nakatsugawa, on the Nakasendo Way in this area. There is a big supermarket there if you wanted to stock up, get with some snacks and buy your own food. But one thing I would say is it's not really a walkable town unless you're prepared to walk for 30 minutes or more. There is a local bus I saw. I stayed at Kiso Mikawa Hotel, which is a little bit out of town. It's about 15 minutes on the river. Really nice, big old hotel. But it was probably 30 minutes or more from the supermarket, so just something to be aware of in Kiso Fukushima. The single room that I stayed in for 2 nights at Kiso Mikawa was extremely well priced. It was absolutely fine. It was big enough. It had everything I needed. The bed mattress was a bit on the firm side, but I find that's a common issue in Japanese hotels. There were plenty of shared toilets and sinks. There was a wonderful onsen with shared showers and bathroom items. I also took up the meal plan on one night, and the food was great. Lots of choice for the set menu, and pretty reasonable at 2,000 yen, which is about 20 Australian dollars, or say 13 US dollars. And it included a free drink station, so there was non-alcoholic cold drinks and hot drinks, including tea and coffee and hot chocolate. The breakfast was also good, with lots of choice between Western and Japanese food. So the next day, you just need to be aware of that you have got that bit of a walk to the train bus station, but it's a nice walk because you're walking along the river. So day 2, once again, I had done my homework the day before, and I knew where I wanted to go, and I knew what time the bus left, which was at 9:25 outside the train station. So I was really organised to get going. The bus that I was taking is a sort of dedicated forestry bus taking you to the Asakawa forest. There is a ticket station like opposite the train station. There's a ticket office where you have to buy your ticket before you get on the bus. It is on a very limited timetable. They don't run regular. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 times in the morning and then 2 or 3 times coming back in the afternoon. And once again, you need cash for that fare. It wasn't expensive. And you're probably better off buying a return ticket because there's no other way to get back from the forest. Now, Asakawa Forest is the home of Japan's forest bathing concept. It's an absolutely worthwhile half-day detour from the trail. It's one of the prettiest places I've been in Japan. The bus takes about 30 minutes to get up to the forest, but it's a gorgeous ride up the mountain. There's a big river winding around the roadside, and when I got off there, the first thing I did was go to the forest railway. So there's a restored steam train that goes through the middle of the forest. This was previously a logging area, so that's obviously what the train tracks are for. It was a nice little ride on the train through the forest to get your bearings. And some people chose to get off halfway. I did the return loop. And they give you a map that shows you where all the trails are in the forest. They also gave you these quaint little wooden train tickets, which I loved, made out of the cypress pine, which is what all the trees are in the forest. So I came back to the train station, got hold of my walking maps. There were sort of 2 kinds of trails. There was one lot going through the forest, another lot going along the river. And I chose to do one that would allow me to do both. The forest itself is lovely and cool and green. There's moss everywhere. I can see why it's the choice for forest bathing, because you can just sit there and breathe in the smells of the cypress pines, and there's no noise around when you get deeper into those woods. It was good because they had these little semicircles of bench seats that you could sit on and do your sort of, your meditation. I must admit I had half an eye open looking for bears just in case, because once again there weren't many people around. But yes, a really nice, you need to get into the forest while you're there and not just stick to those river trails, as beautiful and scenic as they are. I crossed over then and walked down to the river, mostly boardwalks. And, they wound in and out and across bridges, and there were beautiful autumn leaves and just the prettiest river spilling, like cascading down over rocks, lots of white and grey rocks. Very, very much a photo shoot area. And after I crossed probably the main bridge down near where we got off the bus, I saw there was some signage marked on the trail where you could do hand fishing. So I was a bit curious. I thought, well, I'll wander up that trail and have a look. And you come to a dam and you can see the trout in the water. It was a bit cool that day, and so I wasn't too keen to wander in the water and try my my luck with hand fishing. I don't know what I would have done with the trout if I caught one anyway, but that's a bit of a novelty. And next to it there was a Finnish sauna that you could book. There was no one around for that on that particular day. As I walked back towards the bus area, there was a little shop where a woodmaker who makes the train tickets had his wares on sale, and that was lovely to chat to him and his wife and buy something, that memory of the cypress pine, to take home with you. I really could have spent the whole day here if it was a bit nicer day. So I'd been there about 2.5 hours, and it had just started to sprinkle. There was a big cafe there you could have had lunch. I didn't go into, but I thought, no, I'm going to jump back on the bus because there was something I wanted to see in Agamatsu town, which is where the bus goes through. So I got off the bus, and right at the bus station is the tourist office, and I popped in there. Lovely lady who gave me lots of maps and information and showed me how to get onto the Nakasendo Way. So the Nakasendo Way walks through from Kiso, Fukushima, through Agamatsu. It's one of the post towns. There's a couple of buildings on the south side of town that represent the old post town part of it. And it's about 30 minutes to walk from that bus station, nice off the main roads and sort of upper hillside past a temple, to get down to the post town. And then across the road from that is the Rinsenji temple, I think that's how you say it. And there is a small fee to go inside this temple. The temple itself isn't remarkable, it's what's behind it that I had gone to see. So you walk through the temple, and anybody walking the Nakasendo Way through Agamatsu is going to pass by this gorge area and have to pay that little ticket price. You walk down a ramp, and the river opens up for you, and there is the most spectacular white cliffed gorge here. The name is the Nizami Notoko Gorge. And in fact, if you are catching the train up to Matsumoto, you may spy it if you're sitting on the left side of the train, because the rail line runs fairly close to it. I remember seeing it thinking, wow, what's that? Did some homework, and that's when I found it. It really is a spectacular gorge because it's got this sheer white rock drop-off on either side and really clear blue water underneath. And I threw my pack down and my hiking poles, and I scrambled up the rocks, large boulders, nothing, you could easily get on top of them. To get to the top of the gorge, there's a small shrine, and just get a better view looking down into that gorge. There were no other tourists around. There were a few Japanese people, so it was pretty quiet. I feel like people might miss these two things I saw that day. I walked back along the riverbank. You get a nice view of the river going down, and there's also sort of a sculpture garden and bamboo grove. Now, if you wanted to, you could keep walking along the Nakasendo Way from here through the forest, and the lady at the tourist office told me there was a local bus that I could have jumped on further down and headed back to Kiso, Fukushima. I decided instead to retrace my steps through that lovely area of Agamatsu. And luckily for me, I timed it just so that I could jump back on to that forestry bus I'd come down on and take me back into Kiso, Fukushima. So the next morning, I was ready to leave Kiso, Fukushima and head south to Nagiso on another local train. Once again, I had checked out the day before the best time and the first train to catch in the morning that suited me. And once again, there weren't many other people around. Only a handful seemed to get off with me at Nagiso, and they seemed to be walking the other way to what I was. So I found that I had the lovely little 3-kilometre trail from Nagiso to Samago all by myself, and this was a really pretty 3 kilometres. I would definitely suggest, if you have the time, to include this little extension, either Nagiso to Samago or Samago to Nagiso. Once you walked out of Nagiso, it passed through an old, like a grove of old historical homes, which apparently were a very popular tea house back in the Edo period. And next to them was a temple with a water wheel with some fish in it. And I strolled through there, and then you're sort of heading down through some rural villages, like I said, very quiet and scenic, before reaching Samago. But just before you get to Samago, you'll see a turn off to the ruins of the Samago Castle. It is a short, steep walk. I think from memory it was about 500 metres. You're not going up there just for the castle ruins, because there's not many of them left, a few signage, a few rocks. But there's two reasons why I would take this detour. The first is that walking up the path was past one of the most impressive bamboo groves that I've seen in Japan. Because you're walking up a steep hill, the bamboo grove is planted in the valley below that hill. So they're coming up next to you really sturdy and tall bamboo grove trees, and there was a bit of mist around that morning, and it was sitting in the middle of the grove. It was really a lovely sight. And up the top, you get a view back to Nakasendo and then on to Samago. So for a short diversion, I think it's worth it completely to head up to the Samago Castle ruins. As soon as I walked down from there, down through another forested area, the crowds, as soon as I hit Samago, they were there. There's a water wheel on the northern end of town, and there was a tourist group crowded around it. So I knew I was off the more remote parts and onto the popular section then. Regardless, I didn't find it so busy in Samago. You could definitely pop down little alleyways and streets, and it was a very photogenic town, and lose those groups. It was just a bit of a shock after having walked by myself for a lot of the time and not seen too many people to see so many people. I spent a little while in Samago looking around and then stopped for a drink break. I will highlight there was a cafe that I stopped at on the southern end of town, so heading out to Margamy, and there was a water fountain with bright flowers on the opposite side of the road to the cafe. I'm not a coffee drinker, but there was an Italian group in there, and they were all calling out Bellissimo after they drunk their coffee, so I think that's a good wrap for the coffee. Certainly the fruit drink that I had was really nice. I guess I was leaving Samago maybe around noon, and this seemed to be a really busy time, not only so between 11 and 12 in the town of Samago, but also that section of the trail from Samago up to the tea house, which is sort of the halfway point to Margamy. That might give you a bit of an idea of when people are walking, the bulk of the groups are walking and the tourist buses are coming through. I didn't find it a problem as such. The paths are pretty wide and people are pretty cooperative. I never felt as though it was uncomfortable to pass people. One thing I would say, if you're walking out from Samago like I was, not far out of Samago, you weave up a hill. It was an uphill day for maybe a few kilometres or 2 kilometres say, and you will see a sign to the 2 waterfalls. And depending on which trail map you're following, it will tell you that if you divert through the waterfalls, you're going to head out onto the road afterwards to continue on to Margamy. That isn't quite right. I spoke to people who decided not to do the waterfalls because they didn't want to end up on the road. It was quite easy to walk down into the waterfalls, have a look around. They're lovely waterfalls, there's a male and a female one. Just turn around then, don't follow the signs to the trail because it is going to take you out onto kind of like a local highway. Just turn around and go back out. You do want to do the next forest section, was really pretty, out from the waterfalls. From there, the next highlight is getting to the tea house or the rest stop at about the halfway point. There's some lovely outdoor seating to throw your pack down, stretch out your legs, enjoy some warm sun on your face. It was a humid day, so I certainly needed to have a cool down stop and a cold drink. Inside the tea house, there's the traditional kettle over an open fire, which people were posing for photos. There was sort of a conical Japanese hat there. You could also get either hot or cold green tea. Now this is all put on by this lovely elderly gentleman who stocks up supplies all day long and welcomes travellers. It is free, but there is a donation box if you've got some loose coins to help keep his supplies up so he can keep looking after travellers like ourselves. Outside there was also a board to chalk up where you were from, and proud to say that Aussies were leading the way. After the tea house stop, the trail was much quieter. It felt like the day trippers had made their way through from Margamy, so just after lunch. And that was nice because there were some really beautiful forest trails after this that were quite quiet because the large groups had gone through. And also for me, because it had been a downhill walk most of the day, there's a little more uphill walk most of the day. There was a little more downhill coming into Margamy, which was great. When just before you hit the town, there is a big platform viewing area, which does give you some great views down the valley to Nakasendo, but also just up to the mountains. And there were quite a few people there, good place to stop. And then there's a set of stairs takes you into Muggamay town. And I was really pleased to see, because it was such a hot, humid, uphill day, that there was a craft beer shop pretty early in the piece. And I, once again, put my pack down, wandered in to find a good choice of beers. And there was a few of us sitting outside drinking cold beers. It was a really lovely way as an introduction into Muggamay. I was staying at Muggamay Chaya Guest House. This is very popular to stay here, and this was the one I missed out on booking originally, but kept going back and then was lucky enough to score a room. It is futon-style accommodation with shared bathrooms, but when the host was showing me around when I arrived, sort of 4 o'clock-ish in the afternoon, she was showing me this stainless steel onsen bathtub, and as there was no one else around, I jumped in. It was absolutely heavenly, like a private little onsen. After this, I walked through the town until the sun went down, and this presented beautiful photo opportunities because Muggamay is kind of like downhill, like cobblestone streets downhill, looking down the valley to Nakasendo with all the twinkling lights. Once the sun went down, there's a giant water wheel at that southern end of town, which is great to stop for a photo as well. If you are lucky enough to get a room at Muggamay Chaya, make sure you take up the meal plan. This was one of my highlights of the trip. There are self-catering options available, but there were no sort of, didn't appear to be really any food stores in Muggamay that I saw, and limited other restaurants. But the food was absolutely superb from this guest house. It is a set menu for dinner and breakfast, so you get presented with a tray. They'll tell you what's on the tray. I tried everything and loved everything, even things that I'm not a huge fan of normally, like tofu. The tofu was fantastic that was on the tray. And it's quite, there's a really nice atmosphere. Some travellers are wearing the robes that are provided. You get sat on a communal table, so it gives you an opportunity to talk to other people. In the morning for breakfast, it was fantastic again, but one of the things I will say is if you are a coffee drinker or a tea drinker like me, you would need to bring your own supplies. There's only green tea, but they were happy to give me hot water for a tea bag, and I had my own milk. There was also next to the water wheel a highly recommended coffee shop if coffee is what you need to get going in the morning. So day 4, I woke up nice and refreshed from my onsen bath and good food and ready to tackle my last day. Really sad that it was my last day, but I was heading off on the walk from Muggamay to Nakasendo. And once again, the trail was really quiet. In fact, I didn't see anybody else walking in my direction all day. Saw a few people walking in the opposite direction, which is nice when you have those beautiful serene forest areas to yourself. The first bit of the walk is through quiet rural areas, and it was lovely to see people out working in their gardens, and there were fields of rice paddies, and the views down the valley were really lovely. There were also gardens and rest stops that were very pretty as well. I really liked this part of the trail. And I reached the ancient cobblestone road of Oichai, I'm going to say. I'm not sure of the pronunciation there. And this was a real highlight. It was so well restored and it was so quiet. And it just, if you closed your eyes, you could almost take yourself back, imagine that you were in that Edo period and that, a samurai was going to walk around the corner any moment. And after this part of the path, there was a small village with the same name where there was a really lovely temple that you can go in and visit. And outside the temple was a really large cherry blossom tree and beautiful flowers. So I think this would be a great place if you were walking in spring. I kept walking from here until I came across a tea house. There was a sign out the front saying that the tea house had been making sanmon mochi for centuries, and their descendants had recently revived the tea house and were serving that same dish. It was a really lovely stop. I definitely encourage you to stop in here. That nice Japanese garden as well. I tried the sanmon mochi, which were essentially like little dumplings in gold syrup. Nothing that I would have regularly, but certainly a little novelty to try. And I had a pot of tea, and there were all the travellers in there were chatting and swapping experiences. And after I left the tea house, the trail was really quite steep. So this is what I was saying last episode. It doesn't matter which direction you walk in, you're going to have uphill days and downhill days. Luckily for me, after the hot uphill day the day before, this was my downhill day. So I found this forest very enjoyable to walk through. The others in the other direction weren't quite so keen, like, oh, that was a bit of a hill. You go over then a river crossing where there is a dam wall and the waterfall is spilling over it, and it's a really nice sight. And you walk around the bend and there's benches on the river bend that you can sit and look down to the river. And I was so lucky to see a quite rare Japanese stork fishing in the river. But before I could get my camera ready, it had flown off to try and capture it. The rest of the walk from here becomes increasingly more urbanised, but there were some lovely homes to look at, and there were many beautiful private gardens and shared gardens in the villages. There were small temples and all those signs of daily life. I did meet somebody who said, there was a few too many roads for me on this day. I actually really liked the strolling through the roads. They've taken great care to divert the roads away from what becomes increasingly busy roads into Nakasendo and keep you off those busy roads. And look, walking past at one stage, I met a group of young school children, every single which one of them wanted to say hello and wave to me, and it was a lot of fun greeting each of them. And so I took my time just wandering through. It's really easy to follow this trail because there's a different treatment on the road. And where you do have to cross a busy road, there's generally a tunnel or a bridge. Like in one of the tunnels, they had all colourful children's artwork to make it nicer, even though you can hear the traffic overhead. And just before I headed into Nakasendo, there was actually a temple with a series of red torii gates, nothing like what you see in Kyoto, but nevertheless a nice photo opportunity. And when you walked through them, there was a park with some statues that you could visit before getting back on the path over the bridge and into Nakasendo. There are things to do in Nakasendo as well, but by this stage I was ready to have some lunch, jump on a train back to Nagoya and get back to my bag. It was a really fabulous 4 days. Like I said, it wasn't really hiking in the sense of anything technical or difficult. I would call it more strolling, occasionally having to climb over some hills. I definitely suggest taking your time. Some of the nicest things I saw just came from wandering and talking to the local people. I am sure it will be a highlight of your trip to Japan. I loved it. It's a bit different from some of their other trails because you're very much walking through those villages. But that pretty much sums it up. Look, if you do have any questions, you'd like more details than what I've put in the show notes for you already, by all means, please message me. And if you like what you've heard today and you'd like some more trip ideas, as I said at the start, I'm mostly in southeast Queensland, but I'm just about to do a trip report from New Zealand and other trails around Australia. So please subscribe or follow my podcast, Everyday Hiker. And in the meantime, happy hiking.